Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot for being with me again on Convertible Conversations. This week, all week long, we've been on my journey to freedom, which may be at least part of what your journey to freedom looks like as well, or maybe you can see what's going to happen down the line for you. It started out with unfulfilled expectations. I needed an explanation. I gathered information. Then I got very agitated. And then a strange thing happened. I started to experience fascination, and I really enjoyed it. It had been a long time since I enjoyed my relationship with God. Initially, when I realized that Jesus made it possible for me to go to heaven, and I knew I'd done some bad things, I was grateful. And I loved the new people I was working at a new church we started going to, and I was excited to learn what God could do for me. But I found out there kept being caveats. God will bless you if. These things can happen if. And the stakes kept getting higher and higher and higher. My joy, my initial joy, was plummeting, and it wasn't registering very high. It kept getting lower and lower and lower, and I found out the harder I worked, the lower it got because I couldn't make it work. I couldn't keep from losing my temper. I couldn't be unselfish. I could maybe act unselfish, but inside I wasn't. I still couldn't love others unconditionally, and for crying out loud, I couldn't love God with all my heart, mind, and will, no matter how hard I tried. My joy actually bottomed out when my son-in-law, whom I was very close to, died of cancer when he was 29, leaving my daughter a widow with our 3-year-old son who just adored his daddy, as did most everybody else. Well, I didn't have any real answers for my family or for the church where I was pastoring and he was youth pastor. It reminded me of my very early days as a music pastor years ago when my much older senior pastor confided in the staff that he used to whistle. He used to have joy, but he said it was gone, and he was very, very sad. And he blamed himself, and he tried to work harder to get his joy with God back. We said, well, Pastor, why don't you study and teach on joy? And he said, well, that'd be a good idea. Joy's a good subject. Some weeks later, he taught on the joy of suffering. Not kidding. Well, that's about where I'd gotten when my son-in-law died. But then I was on this new journey to freedom, and I started studying and learning, and I got agitated, and I got fascinated and everything. And I got fascinated with the joy that I had. Something inside of me started living again, and it resonated with the fact that God really is good, that God really does love me and everyone unconditionally. That was a totally new thing for me. I was fascinated with the fact that God really is working out everything for the good, and that ultimate good is ultimate reconciliation, where God will make everything right for everyone. Even all the bad stuff that we've endured here on earth, the mistakes we made, all this kind of stuff, God is ultimately working behind the scenes to work all that out where it will all turn out for the good, with ultimate reconciliation of all back to our original standing with God. Man, I was fascinated and I was joyous with the new understanding I had that it was okay to question God. Where there were Bible verses that seemed to contradict the fact that God is good and loves everyone, I learned that must be because it could be a bad translation. It could be because the scribes over the year changed things. It could be the people who actually wrote it to begin with, that were inspired by God, didn't actually have a full understanding of the Trinity at the time. For example, in the Old Testament, there was no concept of the Trinity or who Jesus was. Or there could be just something that I didn't yet understand. So I could be okay with those things. I didn't have to be able to give answers for every single Bible verse that I couldn't understand, where I'd felt like I had to before. I was fascinated with the understanding that if I use the filter or the lens that God is love, and everything God says and thinks and does flows from his unconditional love, then I will see the Bible as I never saw it before. I'll see things in myself and other people that I never saw before. All these verses that I'd even memorized before started popping out about God's love and unconditional love, and his love never fails. And we were all included at the cross, and that God had reconciled us all to Jesus at the cross and doesn't hold anybody's sins against them anymore. Those verses were right in front of me, and I'd memorized them, but never had a clue what they meant. They didn't even register, but now they were. I was fascinated with all of this. Next week, and for the rest of this week, we're going to see where all of this led to, and we're going to consider what I did with all of this information, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just my journey, but I'll bet it will relate to some of your journeys too. Hey, thanks for being with me. See you next time.